Can you tell me something about your parents and if you have any siblings growing up?
Well, my mother was Thomas Collins Sr., and my mother was Josephine, formerly Sullivan, and they were Jersey City natives too. And I have a brother, Donald. I had a sister, Maureen, who was deceased, sister Patricia, and let's see, there's two sisters and one brother. That's four of us altogether. And so we're pretty widely separated now, but I see them once in a while.
Very good. Do you have any memories that stick out from your formative years growing up in Jersey City?
Well, I like Jersey City. We used to play in the streets like the street kids, and I liked that. I lived around near the courthouse neighborhood when I was a little kid, and then I moved out to near Lincoln Park, where I live right now, later on. So I've lived in those two neighborhoods, and I enjoyed both of them. Just socializing with the other kids out in the streets, which is maybe frowned on today, but I enjoyed it.
Very good. Sounds like a great childhood. Now, tell me something about where you went to grammar school and where you went to high school, and some memories from those years.
Yeah. Well, I started off at St. Joseph's Grammar School, got as far as the end of the second grade, and I moved over to St. Aloysius. Then I finished up at St. Aloysius Grammar School, went to St. Aloysius High School, graduated from there, and then I went to St. Peter's College.
Very good.
Okay.
Okay, we'll lead you right into St. Peter's.
Yes.
When did you first consider attending college after St. Aloysius?
Well, I think I always thought of going to college. I didn't figure on dropping after high school. I wanted to go into something more. I had thought of being a scientific, some kind of scientific line, but that's why I went into St. Peter's. And it was nearby, and it was reasonable, and it had a good reputation. The Jesuits, which had a good, I hadn't been taught by Jesuits up to that time, but I was willing to go.
Very good. Once you decided to enroll at St. Peter's, what did you hope to accomplish once you started school there?
Well, my first line was to go into some form of science, maybe chemistry or physics, and so I took scientific subjects the first year. My first stumbling block was mathematics. The teacher went so fast, and I couldn't catch on. I had a lot of trouble following along. It was a lecture method, rapid fire, and I was lost. And when I figured I wasn't doing too well in math, I was a little bit discouraged in that whole field. And something else happened to me later on which turned me away from that field. I met another field of learning which I enjoyed more.
And that field of learning is?
Well, I met the history and civilization with Dr. Eric Ritter von Kuhnelt-Ledeen. He's pretty well known. He's still, I still see his name in papers and magazines, and they called him the Count here. He had quite a reputation. And he talked about European civilization, the different characteristics of different nationalities, and that became more fascinating than science, and I was more interested in that, so I kind of dropped away from the science subjects, and I concentrated on history and historical subjects and social subjects.
You can't go wrong with history, I'm telling you. History rules. Okay, well, we'll get you back to the start of your St. Peter's career. By the way, did anyone in your immediate family or any other relatives go to St. Peter's before you?
Not before me, no.
Okay. How about afterward?
Well, my brother went. He graduated in 1950. And my daughter graduated in 1982.
Great. Do they have any memories of St. Peter's that they've shared with you?
No, they haven't mentioned too much about it. I think my brother has some. He has friends from school, what he sees. My daughter, I don't know. She was involved in nursing. She went into nursing after she got out of St. Peter's. Went to Pace, became an RN. Now she's in the Air Force as a nurse.
Very good. Okay. So what year did you enroll at St. Peter's?
It was right after I got out of high school in 1940, so it was that year. I started probably September of 40.
Okay. What were your first then continuing impressions of St. Peter's, the school?
Well, you get an impression of pressure, which is different from the high school. The lecture method was different. We, instead of taking a book, read a chapter, we review the chapter. Everything was done in the lecture. You had to remember the lecture, take the notes, and then you go on to the next subject. If you skipped something or you wanted to go over it, they didn't wait for you. That's what happened to me in math. But that was the method. The straight lecture method seemed to be practiced by most of the professors I had in math and French. Well, French was a little bit strange. We had Mr. Samra. He was kind of clownish. He liked to fool around. So we didn't get too much French, but a few laughs. But most of the courses were pretty straight lecture. Maybe Mr. Nevin in the English class, we had more reading of poetry in class and going into the literature. Rather than lectured, we would read it and discuss it. So that was good too.
Very good. You mentioned off camera about your impressions of the campus itself. Can you repeat that for me and our audience?
Well, the boulevard was a largely grassy area, and there was a long, low building going out from where the science building is now straight out to the boulevard almost. And a one-story, low, narrow building, and there were a lot of classrooms along that corridor. It was a temporary, rickety building. We always figured it was going to fall down if anything happened. But a lot of our classes were in that little rickety building, I remember. And it was there was a grassy area in front where we would be gathered pretty often for some kind of a meeting, some kind of if they wanted to get us together, they would bring us out in front there on the boulevard by the grass. So I always remember that. Now I see it goes right to the sidewalk, so there's nothing to stand on out there anymore.
Very good. Give a good picture there. So how were you and other St. Peter's students treated by those in the immediate neighborhood?
I don't think of any contact we had with people who lived around. They didn't bother us. They didn't complain about us. We weren't noisy or bothersome to them, as far as I know. There's a lot of commuting. People would leave school, go home, and we didn't hang around like you might at a board-in place, live-in college. So we didn't have much of that. And there wasn't too much actual contact with the neighbors, except for the one famous place, which you probably heard of, the McDermott Tavern down the bottom on West Side Avenue. That was where everybody hung out. And that was right down Glenwood Avenue at the bottom. And those who were inclined that way would go there for beers quite often. And that was the social point. If you wanted to meet somebody, you'd meet him at McDermott's. It's gone now. Yeah.
So tell me some more about the social life of the St. Peter's College student. It's more interesting than books, don't you?
Well, actually, it was pretty, the people would scatter after school. There wasn't too much gathering except for local people that you knew. I didn't find too much going out to somebody's house in a different town. We didn't do too much of that because we didn't have cars, you know. Kids didn't have cars in those days. So you didn't have a chance to travel out to see somebody the way you might today. So we didn't, if you wanted to meet somebody or have some social thing, it was either an event at school or sometime during the day. But actually, you might have 2 or 3 friends that you would see, but you'd see them after school. But it wasn't so much of a group, Peter's gang, that you might find. It didn't seem to be much of that at all.
Very good. Okay, tell me, was there much racial diversity, such as African Americans, Hispanics, Jewish people on campus when you went to school at St. Peter's?
Hardly any. There were no no African American at all. One or two Jewish fellows. One fella whose parents owned a haberdashery store down the corner from me where I lived. I never knew him till I got to college. He lived down the street. His family lived there, but I met him in college as a student. There were a couple of Jewish fellows, but nobody else, no blacks at all ever showed up there. Not that they were, I don't know if anybody ever applied, but they weren't there. And of course there were no women. It was all male. So there wasn't too much diversity. There were people who weren't Catholic there, but you never heard too much about what anybody was. You never questioned them. So there was very little. It was almost uniform, though. Everybody was from the prep or some other place around here. So it was pretty uniform, really.
Very good. Okay. Tell me, how were the semesters or academic years broken down when you went to school here?
Well, it was the usual, same as the high school. You know, a half a year and then another half a year, 2 semesters a year. But then the war came along, and they decided to telescope them, and they'd have something like 3 semesters a year or 3 year, and that's how I got all tangled up in what semester I was in, and so I started in 40, but I was listed as graduating in 43. That was because of telescoping the terms like that. And that's the reason I was dissatisfied with the fact that I was really in the Army, and they told me I had graduated, and I really felt that I hadn't finished, you know. They called us in, well, to go back a little bit, when the war broke out, most of the fellows joined some sort of an outfit, like the Naval Reserve or I joined the Enlisted Reserve Corps for the Army AARP, ASTP, Army Student Training thing. And they said, you can continue going to college, but when we need you, we'll call you. So about a year and a half later, they called us. In March of 43, they called us in. So we went into the Army. My class, the ones who were signed up for ASTP, all went in when we were called in March. And then we finished the 13-week basic training in infantry basic training. And we finished the basic training, they called us in and said, you fellas, you were seniors in college, you're too old to continue in this Army school program. Said, you were seniors in college? You guys are too old, we're going to have to keep you in the Army in a different branch of service. So we were all sent to the infantry. That's how I wound up in the infantry. Put me in the YD, the Yankee Division, 26 Infantry. So I wound up in the infantry with a couple of fellows from my class, Joe Holleran. I know he's the one I remember because I see him once in a while. He and I went to the 328th together. That was the regiment we went to. So he became a medic, and I was put in the medical company, but then I figured I'd take an infantry basic handling a rifle. I said, if I'm going into the infantry, I want to have a rifle. I don't want to walk around with Band-Aids. So I got into a rifle company and went overseas with the Yankee Division. And Joe was over. I saw him overseas a couple of times. So, and then he came back and became a doctor. He's now a doctor. I see him on the list of alumni. I haven't seen him at any meetings, but I see his name listed, for donations and things. So he's still around.
Well, you mentioned you graduated twice, so
yeah.
the accelerated.
The accelerated course made me very unhappy. I figured I hadn't finished completely, the coursework that they gave us credit for. So when I come out of the Army, I said, well, I think I'll go back and fill out that last half of the senior year. So that's how I came back in 46. the end of 46, after I got out of the Army, come back to St. Peter's, enlisted, registered as a senior. I went through that year. So I was sort of listed as graduating in 47, but I said, well, I already have credit for graduating 43. So when they asked me, what year did you graduate in? So I said, well, 43. So I'm officially listed as a 43 graduate. But I could have been either one because I hadn't finished out the courses I wasn't satisfied with in 47.
How has the school changed from the early 40s, before the war, and when you came back afterward?
Well, there wasn't too much change, really. Actually, a lot of the fellows who went in came back. There were a lot of people who came back, but it hadn't changed too much. I didn't find too big a difference at all. I mean, as far as personnel or student body changes, nothing had changed socially. The courses hadn't changed. Well, faculty was different. A lot of the people that I hoped to see weren't there, but it wasn't a big difference, really.
Okay, we'll get back to the... okay, what's the typical student class day like in terms of classes and homework, do you recall?
Well, we had hour periods, and we were lined up like a regular high school class, rows of seats, the teacher at the desk. Most of them would lecture. I'd give you an assignment. So if it was a written assignment, or an essay, or if it was math problems, you get the written assignment, and that had to be done. That was about it, except remember chemistry. And we had good lab periods and lectures on the chemistry lab, chemistry work. English, Mr. Nevin would have us read poetry, and I liked him. Dr. Ledeen, the Count, would describe the gypsies, or all sorts of things that we didn't know too much about. The Spanish, the character of the Spanish, what they were like. Central Europe. He was from Central Europe, and he always described people in Hungary, people in Bosnia, all places like that. But I found his work very fascinating. His lectures. He just lectured. He talked about what he was saying, and people listened. Some people didn't like him because he had a very high, squeaky voice. And that's the first thing you noticed about him was his voice. He was extremely tall, and but he knew a lot about everything. Especially anything about Europe. He knew, even about the Orient and things like that. He was a very knowing man about humanity. So I really got to like his courses.
Outside of the Baron or Mr. Nevin, were there any other interesting teachers, or who were your favorites when you went to school?
Well, I liked Mr. O'Malley, the biology teacher. He was a good-natured guy, and I ran into him a couple of times since then. Different odd ways I would run into him that had nothing to do with school. Other problems would come up, and I'd suddenly find that O'Malley was in the picture. It's hard to describe them, but I've run into him a few times since. Let's see, Nevin, O'Malley, Mr. Samra. There was a history teacher whose name I can't remember. And there was a man named Father Lynch. He was only there for a year, I think, a young Jesuit, and he taught us philosophy, logic, and epistemology. Now, one thing I'm sure they don't do in St. Peter's today, we had the whole morning was philosophy, 4 hours straight. We walk in and we take philosophy all morning. I think it was 4 hours. And that's what I thought college was like. You'd go in and you'd study philosophy for 4 hours in the morning. Then after that, it was extra. But I loved it. And he was very good. So we had logic, epistemology, and cosmology, ontology, and theodicy. We went through the whole line, but they don't do it anymore, I guess, do they? Did you have epistemology?
I didn't go to school here, but actually I did have to have, St. Bonaventure, I had to have Latin, Greek, and philosophy, theology, so same pattern.
Did you have the logic, epistemology, cosmology, ontology?
Epistemology, not ontology, but some other weird.
Yeah, but
stuff.
that was it. I mean, that was a solid. That started at the beginning of the junior year. Actually, you didn't get philosophy till the junior year, but then it was the whole morning was philosophy. But otherwise, the first 2 years you would take regular courses. Your English course, religion course. We had religion course the first year, which was kind of a burden because the teacher was kind of unpleasant. Nobody liked him. He would yell at you. Come in a minute late, he'd be yelling at you. Nobody cared for that man. But and he tried to use up-to-date slang, but he was about 20 years behind. That bothers people sometimes. So that was one of the not so good spots, was that freshman religion course. And but anything else? Let's see, the math course, I only took that one course. After that, I was pretty well shot. I just stayed away from it after that college math course, which was over my head. I think I had to take a conditional. I had a condition, take a failure. I had to take a condition to make up for it. So I didn't go back to math. And I had taken a year of chemistry and I took biology. But the biology was good. The chemistry was not too hard, but it wasn't too difficult. It was like high school chemistry. But the other chemistry was difficult. I know people have had a hard time. They had qualitative and quantitative analysis, which seemed to be giving the guys a hard time, because we would be sort of in the same lab with them, and they were sweating over qual and quant. Yeah.
Very good. So what was some of the typical, what'd you have to wear when you attended St. Peter's?
Well, I think we wore jacket and tie automatically, like we did in high school. It was just automatic that you'd wear a jacket and tie. So you wouldn't think of coming in with a T-shirt or a sweatshirt or something. No, you had to dress sort of formal, and you never thought about it.
Okay, what were some of the, how would you describe the dining hall or the student union when you went to St. Peter's?
Well, it was a little cafeteria. It's a small room. I don't think that building is still here. It was a tiny thing. And we used to just grab a quick sandwich there. You could get a hot meal, I think, but I never bothered with it, because, you just go in, grab a sandwich, and go back to class. And it was pretty small. There were about 8 or 9 rows of tables. It was really small. It wasn't bad, but it was pretty small. It wasn't heavily patronized, really.
Okay, what are some of the rules and regulations that you remember as a student?
Well, I don't remember any rules that you could break that I recall. I can't remember anything about smoking in those days. A lot of people smoke. I don't remember whether you could smoke in school. Nowadays, there's a big uproar about smoking, but I don't recall anything about it then. Probably you didn't smoke, you never thought of smoking. But I don't recall whether there were areas where people could or not. But I don't recall rules like that. As far as you didn't have to be absolutely quiet in the halls between classes. You could talk to somebody walking along the hall. So there wasn't too much of an uproar about that. It wasn't very strict as far as being strictly regulated, as far as I recall. There weren't a tough set of rules that you had to look for. Make sure you didn't break any rules that I remember.
Okay, you talk about your studies. What was your major in school eventually, and how did it help you in postgraduate life?
Well, my major, I guess, turned out to be sort of social science. I think that's my degree said something about social science. I had history courses mostly in that. And when I got out, graduated after getting my degree, I decided to go into teaching. So I decided to use English literature as the subject I would teach. So I went to Seton Hall as a graduate school and took English Lit. And they had a school in Newark, had a school in St. John's Grammar School up here in the Boulevard. They used classrooms there, so I used them. And we had there was a lot of activity around for Seton Hall. So I took a lot of courses in Seton Hall in the city and in Newark, never out to South Orange. Got near South Orange. But I got my MA from Seton Hall in English literature, and then I took the required education courses and started teaching English in the Jersey City system. Did that for 31 years.
Very good.
So that was it. That was the only job I had, was teaching English from school, from St. Peter's to Seton Hall, to teaching, and then retiring.
Very good. So tell me about some of your memories of the school library. And
Well, I think there was a question there about women. I think there were women working in the library. There were women in school who worked in the office and in the library. But I used to like the library. You could always go and pick out a book. I used to use the library a bit. Had a good selection of books to back up your studies or for ordinary reading. And it was pretty much the same as it is now. It's expanded quite a bit. Actually, the building has kind of grown. It's almost a new building. But there are parts of it that were there originally. But it was always a pleasant place. People were always nice. Because the librarians were always nice. There was a woman there. She may still be here. I don't know. Began with an S, like Shu or something like that. You know.
Great shot, yes. Great shot. She just retired a few years
ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. She was there for so long. She was there when I was a student, and I kept going back and saying, "She's still here." So she's still there. Yeah. But I mean, she's finally retired. But they were always very helpful. And I used to like the library. We didn't, there's a question there about places where we studied. We never used to study together so much in school. I think if you ever sat down to study, you might study in the cafeteria rather than in the library. Because sometimes they would try to shush you if you were getting boisterous or loudly discussing something. So, but the library got a lot of use.
Good. Did you have study halls in?
No, we didn't have a study period or a study hall.
Okay.
How did you make the transition from the college student to the military life, and did St. Peter's help you in any way?
Well, I guess we were pretty self-disciplined from St. Peter's, I suppose. We were expecting to be called, and actually that was a big break in the education process. I was called out in like the middle of senior year, it seemed, down to the south, Camp Wheeler, Georgia, for 13-week basic training. But it was almost like one kind of school to another kind of school, going into the infantry. And it was another case of taking orders. It was a pretty good idea of self-discipline in the Army, except that they would help you quite a bit. They would tell you what to do. You couldn't tell yourself what to do so much. But being in a strict school and going in an army, you're prepared for it. You're not saying you can't tell me to do this, I want to do that, the way you would do maybe if you were in a looser place. So we were prepared for that. And everybody adapted to the army pretty well, I thought, that I know.
Excellent. So tell me about the Jesuits, our friends. What impact did a Jesuit education hold for you? Were you aware of it when you were in school, and how did you take to Jesuit?
Well, I always knew that they had a high reputation, for intellectual excellence, and I found that they didn't go off on tangents and get lost in some other subject. They stuck to the thing. They had everything planned out. I found that was true. They were serious about teaching. They demanded that the class be orderly, that people do their jobs. And so I think they stuck to what I expected them to do. And I appreciated that. Some were more profound than others. I had people who had great reputations, but were sort of like at the end of their careers. I had one guy who had written the book, the textbook for the course, and he just spent his time going from page to page from his book, and he never got off the book. And then we had Rush Rankin, who was famous, and he was hopping around. He was the liveliest guy. Jumped all over the room. He never sat still. But he was very sharp. And some were very serious about the subject matter. The Father Lynch I mentioned as a philosophy teacher, he was very devoted to the subject of philosophy. He used to get tears in his eyes talking about the deeper points of the ontology of the logic. He was very good. He was devoted to the subject. So we find all different kinds, but they did have a common devotion to the education.
So once you graduated, how did the Jesuits impact your life, looking back upon your experience?
Well, they had given me an idea that I didn't shake off the religion the way my kids have. My kids went to parochial high schools, but they didn't make a deep impression on them. I mean, they seemed to be able to shake it off very easily. But everything stayed with me. And I find that that's something that you can appreciate. And I think they were influential in making me see values, what's good, what's a waste of time, what's worthwhile. And, getting to the facts of things, getting at the essentials of an argument. They did the logic of I always liked the logic and epistemology courses of using your mind and being able to entangle a problem, getting at the facts. That was one of the most influential things, the training and thinking from the philosophy course, which wasn't a Jesuit thing. Actually, it came from the medieval philosophers, but they taught it in a way that you didn't forget. But that's one of the things that I remembered most, the logical thinking that we were taught how to do.
Okay. Extracurriculars, right here on your questionnaire, that you were in the Cross Keys. Can you tell me more about the Cross Keys?
Oh, that was a Scholastic Honor Society. It didn't have anything to do with anything extracurricular. No, extracurricular, I had my own extracurricular activities at that time. I was interested in boxing, and I went in the Golden Gloves. So But the track coach kept after me. He wanted me to go out. I went down and ran once or twice, but not in competition. But my heart wasn't in it. And he was always saying, "You got to get rid of that boxing. You're just going to bang yourself up." But he got annoyed at me, and I never went in for the track team. Never stayed with it. I was doing the boxing, so I never got into any real extracurricular athletics or glee club or anything like that.
So tell me about your Golden Gloves. How'd you do?
Well, not too well. I got to the city semifinals, Jersey City semifinals, which isn't much. So wasn't too many bouts, but I had spent almost more than a year training in the gym, boxing in the gym, getting to know a lot of people. And it was an interesting world. I still like the world of boxing. I still watch them on TV all the time. My wife gets annoyed at me for that. But you get to know colorful people in that world.
That's true. That's true. It says here you won the Chetwood Award in 1977. Can you tell me some more about that?
Well, Pat Caulfield, you know him? No? He's retired now. He was head of the education department here. And he used to put practice teachers into the public schools. And I was in class with him when I came back after the war. And he used to give out education awards. And he gave me one of these Chetwood Awards. It's an Education Teacher of the Year award thing. And so he put me in for that in 1977. So it's a big plaque I got for that. So I got the Krosky Award. That's like a scholarship medal. And the Chetwood Award is an Education Teacher of the Year award. So I have that. So it was from Caulfield's department. I don't think he's been out too long. Yeah. But that's it. That's the recognition.
Did you ever meet Father Chetwood?
Yeah, I had him in class.
What was your impressions of Father Chetwood?
Well, he was the one fellow who stayed with his book. He didn't talk too much about anything else. He wasn't too communicating with the class. He asked a question, he wanted the answer, and didn't really show himself as a person too much at all. So it was disappointing in a way. But I still had the textbook he used. He wrote the textbook. But he was quite old at that time. So was Father Rankin, but he was a little lively, but he didn't stick to the subject as much as Chetwood did. Yeah.
So do any other Jesuit teachers stand out in your mind besides
Well,
Rankin?
just that Father Lynch who taught the epistemology of cosmology. Those are the ones that stood out with just those. Yeah.
How was readjustment after the war? You are just coming home from the wartime situation, and you re-enter the private sector. How does St. Peter's help you at that time?
Well, it wasn't such a big change. It was something I was so used to, and it hadn't been too different. And I met the same people I had left almost. They were coming back too. I met a lot of people who were coming back. And at that time, there was quite a few men around who were coming back. It was the thing that everybody was doing. So as you were coming back in, you weren't alone. You were with a whole crowd of people who were coming back into the world and looking around for what to do. And I had picked out the idea of going to school, which takes a lot off your mind about looking around, what are you going to do next? So I was all set with that, and I was familiar with it, and I was with people I knew, so it wasn't any kind of a shock, just slide right in. It was easy.
Can you tell me about the religious atmosphere on campus?
Well, I remember being in that chapel quite a bit, but it wasn't very devotional all the time, We had our classes that would be religious, so we started with a prayer. I don't know if they still do that, but they did that. And then the synodality I guess everybody was a member of the Sodality, but exactly what we did, I can't really remember. But it was part of the thing, but it wasn't something that really hit you hard as far as it was built into the texture of the learning and other things, but it wasn't a separate thing that some people were more involved in than others. You couldn't make a distinction about it. But we seem to be going in the chapel quite a bit for different things.
Very good. Going to the opposite extreme, do you recall any political activity on campus? Any?
None at all. There wasn't any political stirrings at all at those times. There weren't any hot issues, just Democrat and Republican, but there weren't any issues that were morally significant or exciting, like the abortion or the things like that people fight about. There wasn't anything going on then that people were excited about. So there wasn't much. Like now, St. Peter's had Cuomo speaking, a couple other losers.
Get that on tape. But okay, also, talking about campus activities, do you remember any shows of school spirit or ceremonies or rituals that the students all boosted the culture?
Not really. I didn't really go to the games. There were people who were interested in basketball. There were athletic guys who went for the teams, but I never got to wasn't much of a basketball fan, so I didn't go to the games and see how they supported them. But there were people who were interested in that, but I wasn't in that thing. So I can't say too much about the spirit.
Do you remember Peter Peacock, the peacock mascot?
No, we didn't have that I recall.
Oh no, it wasn't. That must have came later.
Yeah.
The live peacock in the
No.
middle of the quad. Okay.
No.
Okay, tell me about some of your best friends or some interesting characters or other students.
Well, one of my friends was Tom Carney. He was a fellow I met here, and I associated with him for quite a while. He was a very witty fellow, and I went in the Army with him, and then we got separated in the Army, and I met him after the war, and I see him once in a while. Don't see him too frequently now, but he's still around. The other people that I used to associate with are all passed away. Morris McLaughlin. See, I had a list of people. I was going to see if I still have them.
All right.
Oh, that's a check. That's not what I was going to
I'll take that.
My son wants me to cash his check. What do I have it here? Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, I might have it here. Let's see. Yeah. There was a fellow named Bill Hine. He was in the paper not too long ago. He was blind, and he had a dog. And he brought that dog around. He had to bring it around to class with him all the time. And he was pretty badly crippled too. So he stayed with us all the time we were in school, and he graduated with it. There was another guy named Ed Kevel, big fat fella. I knew him from grammar school and then in college. So those four stood out in my mind. Tom Carney, Bill Hine, Ed Kevel, and Maurice McLaughlin. So those are people I hung around with. Some of them were funny. Kevel was funny, and McLaughlin he was a sociable guy. And so I enjoyed their company, and two of them I met in the Army. I was with them for a little while, and they were separated.
Very good. So we'll shift into the general gear here. Can you tell me about some of your highlights and lowlights from freshman year?
Oh, well, I did mention The religion class was kind of a low light. The math class was definitely a low for me. I wasn't making it at all with that. I floundered through that. The highlight was, let's see, in freshman year, I think Mr. Nevin's English class was a highlight for me in freshman year. He was very humorous, and he explained the English, the literature selections, and kept us interested in them. And he had a good attitude. Everybody enjoyed his class. So those were things that I enjoyed in freshman year. But, now the other years were pretty much the same sort of pattern. You know, some classes you had a good time, others were slow or didn't make it. You know, but when I get to the Dr. Ladine's class, it was fascinating. When he started talking about European civilization and the different countries and the different types of people, that was very good. I enjoyed that very much.
Should I give you each year, sophomore?
No, it's pretty much a mix of the same thing.
Okay.
You know, because I can't even tell one from the other. Because they telescoped when they changed the schedules, so sometimes we had like a half of a junior year and half of a senior year, and one like 1943, I think, we had seniors and junior year together, because when they did accelerate for the war, I couldn't remember which year was which when you look back on it.
Right. About, well, commencement, you told me about the...
Well, yeah. Well, actually, some of them I didn't even go to, I think. I don't even know if I went to that commencement. They said, you don't have to go. You know.
You spoke of Dr. Levine and his geography class and
Yeah.
speaking of Europe. When you were in the service, did you travel to Europe?
Yeah, I was in Europe.
Did some of the things he said prove out to be true?
Yes, it was interesting to see the Normans, you know. We knew something about the Normans from the way he spoke about them. You know, they were really like the Nordic people who came down and invaded France, and they still had some of the characteristics of those Northern Europeans. Big, burly people they were. And,
so you would say your St. Peter's College education kind of prepared you for your travels?
yes, I think it was helpful. Then we went actually from Normandy out through Central Europe to Lorraine, and Lorraine is a country which I was prepared for the way he talked about. It's right on the border between France and Germany, and it says Lorraine, and it's part of the French map, but the people all speak German there because they were traded back and forth between the two countries all the time. So it was no surprise to us to find people in one country speaking the language of another country, because I knew what had happened to them, and I remembered about his discussions about language, that it's not unusual for people in one country, you know, to retain the language of their previous rulers or whatever it was. So it's kind of odd to find people in France who have no speaking knowledge of French, or at least if they have it, they don't use it in their ordinary conversation. So seeing Europe through the history I studied was kind of useful, although Lorraine is a kind of a dismal place. It's one of these places with cow flop in the middle of every street. You know, it's a country, rural place, you know, with all cows, and they just draining.
Number one export, you know. Cow flop.
Yeah, when the shell
No,
hits them, it's bad.
I'm just kidding. Speaking of cow flop, back to St. No. Cut that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a few names, and if you can just give me some recollections of them, if you recall them, then you can let me know. Okay, the president when you were there, Dennis J. Comey.
Yes, yeah. He was a very stern sort of a man. Yeah. He was a little bit scary in a way, that he seemed to be very, very tough. And he wanted to make everybody to toe the line and do what they're supposed to do. But he didn't pick out people and punish them, but he just gave the impression that he was going to have things running right. That was about it. We didn't really have him speak a lot to us. He just walk by and look around and say a couple of words about everything's supposed to follow the way things should be, and that was enough, you know. So that's what I remember of him.
Did he remind you of a, excuse me, did he remind you of a sergeant in the Army?
He was more remote than a sergeant. A sergeant might give you a boot. He wouldn't do anything like that.
And that was Dennis Comey, okay?
Yeah.
Just say the name.
Hmm?
Can you say the name?
Dennis Comey?
Thank you. That's for a reference, because when we go back, we'll know who you're talking about.
Yeah.
How about J. Edward Coffey, Vice President?
I don't have a clear impression of Coffey.
How about Father Francis Shallow?
Now, he was a fellow from Prep, wasn't he? The head of Prep. Yeah, I never met him, but he was down in Prep, I think.
How about Father Arthur Homan?
He was gone when I was there. I don't know about that list. How about the one we knew was Father Volko. He was the dean. Now, he was somebody who talked to us and handled discipline cases. He was stern, but he was fair. Very Germanic type of guy, you know. But he was tough, but he was good.
How about when you came back from the war? Did you have any interaction with Father Vincent Hart?
No.
Any other teachers from the late 40s that stand out, or administrators?
Not really, no.
Okay, we're just about at the end here.
Mm.
You're doing great, doing excellent. Okay. What was the best advice and guidance you ever received?
Oh, that's one thing. I was looking at that and I'm saying, did anybody ever sit me down and give me advice? I can't think of any particular line that I got about what to do with my life or what to do about any situation that stands out. I really can't think of any particular thing.
Okay, well, you mentioned this or touched upon it. Do you attend or support school alumni functions, and how often do you?
Well, not too much. I show up once in a while when they have a reunion of classes or certain years. I'll show up, but not frequently. No.
Okay, the last one.
Mm-hmm.
This is the important one. In your estimation, tell me the value of the St. Peter's College experience for those who might be viewing.
Well, it was a training for the mind. The courses, the philosophy courses, were the ones that I remember most and cherish most. They trained the mind to dig out the truth, to be able to find it, to use accurate methods of analyzing things. The moral training was there, that was helpful. The cultural training, the knowledge of the world, I got a bit of that, some of that from the other professors, and in general a respect for learning and a value of learning. I was told that, and it was imbued in us to respect learning and to respect people who are devoted to learning. So that's a good thing to carry away.
One last question. What led you into becoming an English teacher?
Well, I was interested in literature. I liked literature, and it was something that well, when you think of teaching, it's one thing that lends itself easily to passing on to somebody else, you know. And the subject matter is abundant, and it's something that the kids do know, and some of them don't even look for, but it's something you can bring out to them. So that's why I guess I took that.
Excellent job.
Thank
Yes. Challenge,
Thank
yes.
you.
Okay.
Yes.
Hey, what was that?
What time is it? Wow.
3:25.
great
I
job.
hope Mr. Coffey isn't waiting. That wasn't.
Before you move.
Okay, take the bug off.
Take
That's
the-